So, Jai Bhim, Namo Buddhaya, Jai Kabir, and Jai Rohidas ji. So, today is our fifth session on the ongoing series of 6 talks by Peter Sahib. And we will be looking at, we are looking at many dimensions of Sadhguru Kabir, which opens up into different planes of realities, as it were. And Peter sir has been very meticulous enough to bring to us the links between Sadhguru Kabir and the Sadhguru of the Sadhguru, the great Buddha. And he has been talking about in a very fascinating way as to how we can relate the practices taught by Sadhguru Kabir in terms of the Buddhist meditational practices, the very foundational practices like Satipatthana, Anapanasati, and so on and so forth. So we are having a very fascinating journey so far. And today, Peter sir is going to embark on a journey of cutting all the the bhrams or the delusions that we are all tied up with all the time, and they are like the well of ignorance, which sort of doesn't let us to be free, and it ties it down to something which is not so pleasant, which is not so enlightened. So I think with Peter G's exploration of Kabir, the way he is doing it, it has been a lot helpful to, I think, many of us, and in the future, those who are going to listen to him. So without taking much time of Peter sir, I invite Peter Sahib to please commence his 6th lecture. And let me share this option of the screen. So
here, yes, please.
So here we go.
Thank you so much, Jai Bhim, to all of you. It's a rare opportunity to have a chance to share with you about my studies of Kabir. And in the last few weeks, we have, during this series of talks, I've tried to look at the practice that's described in Kabir's verses, as opposed to what you could call the precepts, the beliefs. But I've looked at the way that the practices can be understood from Buddhist contexts. And in this case, this week, I wanted to turn to a more social dimension of Kabir's teachings. And in the tradition, which possibly goes back as well to the Dhammapada in a way, there is a way in which you find in the Dhammapada there are different angas, different sections, chapters, which describe different topics. And similarly in Santa verses of Kabir, Raidas, and Dadu and others, there are often collections of dohas, saki, as we say in Kabir tradition, which are arranged by anga. And one of these angas in the older manuscripts is often called Brahma Vidushana, which I suspect is the Sanskrit word Vidushana. But Brahm is the word that we know already from Hindi. Hindi may be Brahma, yes, yeah. And I thought don't have many pictures for this week, but here's a picture back from, I think it was 2017 when I was last in Kashi, Varanasi, and I visited the Kabir Mutt and met again with Vivek Das, who I had met many years ago, back in the 80s, when he was a young man, and the old Mahant was still on the throne. And I was looking at the way that he had created a kind of spiritual museum at Kabir Chora, in which there is a very strong presentation of Kabir as a social revolutionary. And I think this is something that we should look at, because that's partly what Kabir is so famous for, isn't he? Is this strong criticism or critical element. But I think it's also important to bear in mind what I'm going to try and show you today, that the main thing that's really being criticized is Brahm, delusions that we fall into. And if you think about, sometimes I find myself trying to understand things because life is so complicated and difficult. And I find myself going back to the notion of the Rag, Moh, and Dvesha, the forces of attraction, aversion, and Moha in this Buddhist sense, or one of those neither the attraction nor the aversion, often leads to a mind state, which is a form of delusion where you are caught up in different fantasies. And I think the Brahma Vidushana is related to this idea. And within it, we're going to find also descriptions of pakanda, of people who are selfishly involved in delusion. But it's quite possible, without being selfish, to also just fall, as Mangesh was saying, into these kind of delusional states of mind. So I think we should, with the image here of Vivek Das, this reminds me that we need to be focusing on what happens within the mind and body. Because I think when I was last there, I was asking him about surati and nirati and what they related to. And one of the things I remember him saying to me is, whatever they relate to something which goes on within your own mind and body, because that's where everything is taking place. So, bearing that in mind, let's go on to the first of the Brahm, which I think Kabir is associated with dispelling. And this is the delusion that caste is somehow linked to liberation. So this verse crops up in the Allahabad edition of Kabir, which is from 1907, and also in the famous translations by Tagore and Underhill. But my translation here is from the Allahabad edition of the Bani. And in fact, I was just thinking about it as I was working on this, thinking, I'd like to just try and work on a few things in this translation, slightly different from that in my recent book. And you can see that it says, it starts, Santana Jatna Pucho Nirgunya. And unfortunately, Chiti Mohan Sen thought that Nirgunya would mean something like somebody who has no qualities. So the translation, which is famous in English, says something like, and in Hindi commentaries now, says Nadan Log, Santon ke Jatna Pucho. But it doesn't mean that, does it? If in the context of Kabir's verses, if we're talking about Nirgunya, we're talking about people who have faith in the divine, which is formless, which cannot be described, which is Nirgun. But anyway, for people who believe in that, we shouldn't be asking about the caste of sons. And then there's this remarkable bit of the verse where he says, Sad Brahman, Sada Chatri, Sade Jati Baniya, Sadan me Chatti Sakom hai, Teri Tora Puchaniya. There are Brahmin sads, Kshatriya sads, Vaishya Jati sads. There are 36 Gom in the sads. Your question has somehow gone awry. Is Teri Pashan hai. And so Kabir is saying that, in fact, sads can be found amongst all castes. And nobody seems to know what the 36 Gom are. I hear that it's actually also nowadays part of political discourse at the moment. Even in India, people are standing up in जब चुनौती होते हैं, चुनाव होते हैं, वो कहते हैं कि आप 36 कौम मुझको मदद दें. But it's interesting, the first reference I can find to this kind of concept was in Jayasi's Padmavat. Goes back to what, 1540? And in it, he also refers to there being Chattis Kuri, like cool. So it shows that this concept was common, but I think everybody has always said that the actual list is completely unclear. But anyway, many communities. There are, and this of course is nice because we've got Raidas here as well. Sade Nao, Sade Dobi, Sade Jate Bariya. Sadhan Mara Das Sante Supacharishi So Bhangiya. There are Baba Sads, Washerman Sads, and Beetle Seller Jati Sads. Santrai Das was amongst the Sads. And so was Rishi Swapach the Sweeper, which reminds us, of course, of the followers of Balmik and Punjabi community followers who are also so important amongst the Dalit communities. And Hindu Turk dui deen bane hain, kachun nahi pehchaniya, lakan jati jagan mein peli, khal ko fand pasariya. Hindus and Turks have created two faiths. It's interesting, isn't it, that he's using the word deen here for it. So he's using the Urdu word for the faith in the sense of a religion or the other world in that sense, rather than saying dharma or anything else like that, or mazhab. He says deen, two faiths, kachu nahi pehchanyan, but they don't understand anything. And there are lakhs of jatis in this world spread out, but the noose of death is on them all. So I think you can see what that's going on there. And this is the biggest issue, isn't it? How can we attain liberation in this life before we die, which crops up a lot in Kabir's verses. The sants are the highest. The last line is a bit hard to translate. Sabba tattanma sant bhare hai, shabda rupa jhin dahiya, kahe Kabir suno bhai sadhu, sata rup vahi janiye. The sants are the highest of all truths. They are the embodiment, literally, dahiya, of the word. Kabir says, listen, brother Sards, only sants recognize the real truth. So what I think is interesting about this is that we should be thinking of Kabir as a person who is critical of the idea of a linkage between caste and liberation, which is, after all, one of the problems with Varnashrama Dharma. It's the sort of giving of higher spiritual status to some people than others within that system. I was always horrified when I would be reading with students parts of Ramayana, and it would describe the way that when they wanted to have Ram and his brothers, when the king wanted to have offspring, he appealed to the gods, and Agni Deva gave a putreshta, a potion which would ensure that he had sons. And then they divided it up unequally amongst the sons, so that some had more spiritual nature to them than others. And I always felt when I read that with students that I had to tell them that Ravidas and Kabir were quite clear that, as Ravidas said, samdhala samjhave kau. I explain to all that in equal manner, equal portion, samdal, the divine lies within everybody. That's a very important teaching. So we need to dispel the delusion of some people being more innately spiritual than others. But there are so many delusions that Kabir wants to address. And these versions of these particular doha are found in the earliest versions of the manuscripts, but they're also found, which go back to what, probably about 1600, the earliest versions that have these verses in. But these ones are from the 1900-ish, 1907 version. So they show that people still were following the same beliefs and still understanding within the Kabir tradition these teachings. So let's have a look at some of these. And I mean, you probably know some of these, but let's have a look at them. Pahan Geri Putari, Gari Puja Kartar, Vohi Barosa Matraho, Buro Kali Dhar. You've created stone idols, and you worship them as the creator, although you created them. Don't believe in this delusion. Bhuro Kali Dhar. Don't drown in the dark stream, which I guess is the dark stream of this existence within which we live. And normally those references to dark streams means like the deep ocean that you fall into, or the deep current that you fall into and get carried away. And what about this? So that's a very strong section of these verses. And in the 1907 version of the Bani, these are actually in a section called Murat Ko Ang, the section on Murti Puja. Kaja Keri Kotri, Masike Kiye Kapat, Pahan Bhuli Pirtavi, Pandit Bari Bat. And this is a criticism now of the way that Brahminical tradition has built a cell as black as Kajal. And I think the next line is the mussy in it is not related to ink, which is one translation of it, but to do with missy, the kajal that you put into your eyes. So they've locked it with doors as black as missy. Then we got kajal and missy in the thing, which fits together very nicely. Pahan buli prithvi, and you have mistaken your stones for the whole earth. Not that the word whole isn't there, but prithvi is the earth. Pandit badi bat. And that phrase I had to look up, but apparently Bhat Mirena is waiting to plunder somebody. So Pandit are waiting to rob us all with this belief that the stones are actually what exists outside, all around us and within us. So that's a couple of verses which I think are quite clear about the kind of Brahm that Kabir is criticizing, because it's an error that isn't going to help us. And this is another couple on them, which also I like, because I think they point to various aspects of the issues. Pahan ko kya pujiye, jo nahi de jawab. Andar na asa mukhi, yohi hoi karab. So why do you worship stone? It will never answer you back. So I suppose this is a kind of, it's like a material rationalist criticism of worshipping stone idols, which is that you make entreaties to them, but as far as Kabir observes, they never reply to you. They never speak back to you. So just as a blind man pins his faith in others, under nar asamukhi, that's how it's all gone wrong. So pinning our faith in others is not going to get us anywhere. हम भी पाहन पूजते होते बन के रोज सदगुरु की कृपा भाई धारा सिर का बोझ. I found a number of different people trying to understand this bit slightly differently, but you can see immediately the sense of it, can't you? If I also worship stone, then what would I be like? I would be like a Nilgai wandering in the forest. And some people said that Nilgai is like Bais, is just stupid in some commentaries. But other commentaries said that maybe we should think of it this way, that Nilgai spend all of their time wandering from waterhole to waterhole trying to find food. So if I was to be a worshipper of stones, then I would become like a Nilgai wandering around in the forest and never finding what I was looking for. Satguru ki kripa bhai, but through the grace of the Satguru, Dara Sir Ka Boj, I've thrown this weight off my head. So that makes me think also of this way in which you might remember the Buddha's sutta about there were monks who had to get across a river. And so the monks had to make a raft of wood. And then afterwards, some monks had spent such a lot of time making their raft of wood to get across the river that they carried on carrying the raft with them, presumably thinking I might need it somewhere else further up ahead. But in the analogy in the Buddhist teaching, the answer was that once you finished with something that wasn't necessary, you should let it go. And I think in the same way Kabir is saying here that once you've let go of the idea of Murti Puja, then you should let this weight go from your head. Some more of this, because it's a very strong Kabir line, I think, this one. Pahan Puje Hari Mile, Tome Puju Pahar, Tate Ye Chaki Bhali, Pisi Khaye Sansar. If worshipping stone led the Hari, then I'd worship a mountain. That would be better than this grindstone, the chaki, which crops up so often in allusions to Kabir as well. Pisi Kai Sansar, which grinds up and devours the world. When I read that as well, I also remembered something which was at some time, maybe 20 years ago now, there was a scheme to build a giant Buddha statue in Bodh Gaya by the Federation for the Preservation of the Mahayana. And at one point on their website, they said that the merit the punya gained by worshipping an image was directly related to the size of the image. So this belief must have been in existence long ago, as well as at the moment, that somehow the larger the stone you worship, the more merit you would get. But I think Kabir uproots this idea completely, because he says that there's clearly no relationship between the size of the image you worship and the liberation found through doing so. And it also makes me think about all the giant murtis being erected around the world at the moment too. They've made a, oh, look at this. Murti dhari dhanda racha, pahan ka jagdis, molia bole nahi, kota visvabis. They made a business of making images of stone jagdis, of stone lords of the world. But it won't speak to you if you buy it. Molia bole nahi, kota bisva bis. So that word bisva bis is not very easy to understand, but I've worked out possibly that it's related to Vishva Adhyayas, which is a Sanskritic term for the Lord of the world. So it's just, but the point is that this Vishva bis is kota. It's empty, it's false. So what's going on with everybody building giant images and claiming that this is marvelous when these images are probably literally empty as well? Because you can't have stone giant images, can you? I don't know. Even if you couldn't, it's still empty in this Kabir term. And then also I'm finding at the moment that when I come across dohas which I learnt by heart from different people, but I never knew the context in which they cropped up, it's very nice to see that. And I've got one of them here on this page for us. The first one, though, is an interesting one, isn't it? Kabir, dunya dhere sis navavan jai, hriday mahi hari basein, tu tahi lo lai. Kabir, you'll bow your head to a temple in this world, dunya dhere, but Hari lives within your heart. It's there you should fix your love or concentration. I love the way that Kabir and the Sant's verses have different layers of meaning. And it's seen, I was reading a short story with somebody the other day, a modern Hindi short story. I think it's Shatranj Ka Khelari. And in that, lo is used in the way that it was used in Urdu in the early 20th century to mean love. But in Kabir verses, it often means concentration, absorption. But so it can be either. You should either fix your love in your heart or you should fix your concentration in your heart. One of the strengths of Kabir verses is that it leaves things open for different ways of seeing the truth. And this verse I have remembered from many years ago. Manamatara dhila dwaraka kaya kasi jan. I remember it as Dasama dware ka dahura tame jyoti pichan. This version has Dasa dware, but it would mean the same. My mind is Matara, my heart is Dwarka, my body is Kashi. My temple is the 10th door, Yahi, Brahmarandra, in which I recognize the light. I think I might have incorporated this verse another time into one of these presentations, because I feel that this verse points out that even if we don't have a homeland any longer and it's somehow lost to us, our body is our homeland. And I think that this kind of teaching also reflects back to the Buddhist teaching, that the external practices are not what will get you liberated. It's within your own mind and body what you do, which will allow you to test the truth of the Buddhist Dharma and realize it for yourself. So that's a perspective I'd like to take on this. And it's interesting to see if you also would agree that this is some way that we can look at this. It's a constant emphasis on not getting caught up in external matters, not being pulled out of the sense doors of the body, but recognizing what's at the sense doors And this taste, the Dasavadhare ka dehura, is a very interesting reference. Okay. I'm going to have some shabdas as well this week, but I've had a number of, I liked these different verses. And so it's also important to see that there's another set of Kabir verses which criticize not Brahminical practices, but the practices of the Islamic traditions as well. And these are a couple of the famous ones, aren't they? Although the second one's the more famous. Kankar pata jhorike masjid lai chunai. Ta chari. It should say mula, but I've written sula. I have to change that. Ta chari mula bangade. Kya bahira hua khudai. Putting stones and rocks together, they built a mosque. Well, there you go. And the chun, I guess, is to select. That's an interesting verb. It made me think of plastering to begin with, but that's the wrong meaning. The mullah climbs up it and calls out at prayer times. That's the bhangdenas in the other verse too. Apparently it means to make loud clucking noises in Persian as well, like a cockerel calling out at the beginning of the day. So it's not the politest way to say the call to prayer. And has your God gone deaf? Or has God gone deaf that you need to do this? Again, it's a criticism of something external as opposed to looking inside. And then this one also is a version of a very, I think, famous Saki. Mula chari kalkaria alak nabahira hoy. Jehi karan tu bhangne so dilahi under hoy. The mullah climbs up and calls out, but the invisible is not deaf. And you're so interesting, alak is the term for the reference here, not Hari. The reason why you cry out the call to prayer lies within your own heart. So, two criticisms of Islamic tradition. But then have a look at these two. These look at another couple of elements to it. And I think they also come from this same ang. In this case, it's called Tirth Bratka ang, but it's a subdivision that the editor had put it into in the 1907 edition. Puja Seva Name Brat. Guriyan Kasa Kel. Jablaga Piyo Parse Nahi. Tablaga Sanse Mel. Worship, puja. Service, seva. Name, niyam, rules, as in the rules of austerity, and vrat, all those things that we know. Guriyan Kasa Kel. These are like playing with dolls. And I guess the suggestion is that these are somehow kacha practices, because what would be baka would be jablaga piya parse. But until you meet with the beloved, until you attain union, then only unions you have are doubtful. Sanse mel. Jablaga sanse mel. Interesting, very compressed verse. And look at this one. This one's an interesting one too. So now we've got a criticism of puja, seva, name, and brat. So very specifically critical of, you could suggest, karam kandi practices. We've had criticisms of murti puja. We've had criticism of the delusion that call to prayer is really a spiritual practice. And now we've got criticisms of a whole range of things which are to do with karam kand, in the sense of all of that sort of, you know, if you make a mistake, you have to go to the Brahmins and then you have to pay a fee and then they carry out some sort of ritual. I always used to read a story with the students, which I should remember the name of, but I've forgotten it. It was a Bhagavati Charan Varma story about somebody who thought that they'd killed a cat. And then the Brahmin tries to get them to pay an immense amount of money and have a gold cat image made and all this sort of thing. And then as they're about to sit down and do the ritual, the cat wakes up and walks away. So I think people have been critical of this kind of practice for a long time. Japatapadike totara, tirtha brata biswas, suwa sembal suike, That should be like suva. Suva symbol, suike, seike, pir uri chela niras. When you see that believing in chanting, austerities, pilgrimage, and vows are all empty beliefs, japatap, tirtabrat. Like the parrot who's seen the semel tree's cotton buds, you'll fly away disappointed. I don't know if I've ever actually seen a semel tree, but it's a very popular kind of simile that crops up in Kabir and other Sant's verses, that the parrot thinks that the gorgeous flowers of the semel tree will be wonderful, but when it finds that they only have cotton bud type material within them, then they fly away disappointed. And we too will be disappointed when we realize that practicing jap, tap, tirat, and brat isn't going to do any good. And why is it not going to do any good? It's going to not do any good because we'll die before we attain anything. It's perhaps what he's going to say to us. I think so. Tirtha brat bisha bilari, sabajag raka chai, Kabir mula nikandia, kona hala hala hai kai. Pilgrimages and penances are poisonous creepers. So there is a section in the sense of criticism of pilgrimage practice as well, very specifically. And they've overshadowed the world. They've grown over all the world. But Kabir pulled them up from their roots. I think it's an injunction. Who would want to eat their poison? Khan halahal kai. And halahal, I believe, goes back to the belief about Shivji and the poison that he drank when the milk ocean was churned. So it's a very dangerous poison. If it can, only somebody like Shivji in traditional belief could eat it, then and survive. Shows you again the way that there was a conversation going on between Kabir and his followers and not siddhas, not yogis, the Kabir, the followers of Gorakhnath, when we find this kind of reference. Oh, thank you so much. Let's have a look at the last one. It might be the last one I'm going to do of the dohas. So this is another one which seems to be also basically a criticism of Tirtha practice and belief. Tirtha bratta kari jugamua, Tirtha bratta kari jagamua, jure pani nahai, satana majhane bina, kala jugan juga kai. The world dies practicing pilgrimage and vows. Tirtha brat. Or maybe they're the same thing. The vrat, when you make a vrat saying, I will go on tirtha if something happens, the son is born, my business is rescued, the weather gets better and the crops don't die. Satanam jhane bina, without knowing the true name, death devours us all in age after age. And I mean, normally when we say things are in age after age, we think that's just a way of saying, well, it's for a very long time. But I suppose this is also a kind of an encouragement for us to practice within this life. So these have been a collection of what I think are some of the most striking Kabir dohas about his trying to dispel the delusion that any of these practices will actually help you escape from death. And the only escape from death is what? Something which was discussed in the earlier talks. And maybe it needs more discussion in the future because, it is a feature of life. So now I have a slight problem for my presentation, which is I've got, I think 3 shabdas maybe. I think I've got time for them. Yeah, there you go. This one is one of the lovely shabdas from the 1907 edition of Kabir from Allahabad. And this one is called Bahuri Nahi Avana Ye Des. And so I'll read the Hindi out and then I'll go and I've got the English on another page because it won't fit on one page. Bahuri Nahi Avana Ye Des. Jojo Gahi Bahuri Nahi Aaye. Patavata Nahi Sandes. Suranar Muni O Pir Aulia. Devi Deva Ganesh, Dari Dari Janam, Sabe Bharame Hai, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, Jogi, Jangam, O Sannyasi, Digambar, Durves, which is Darvish. Chundit, Mundit, Pandit, Aloy, Sarga, Rasatala, Sesa, Gyani, Guni, Chatur, O Kavita, Raja, Ranka, Nares, Koi Rahim, Koi Ramba Khane, Koi Kahe Ades, Nana Besha Banai Sabe Mili, Dhumi Firu, Chahudes, Kahe Kabir, Antana Peho, Bina Satguru Pdes. So my approximate translation for this is going to be something like this. No one ever comes back to this land. We won't be born into the same place that where we die. Well, maybe we will, but we don't know. None, because none who've left have ever returned. None has ever sent a message. Gods, men, sages, peers and Aulias, goddesses, gods and Ganesh. Over and over they forget who they were when they're born. Even Brahma, Vishnu and Mahesh, Shiva. Yogis, Shaivite Jangam ascetics, sannyasi renunciates. Naked Digamba Jain monks and Muslim mystics. So you see, he really is criticizing everybody, isn't he, for their external practices. Temple priests with top knots or shaven-headed. Everyone, I think that should be in heaven or earth, even the thousand-headed serpent lord. Everyone, whether wise, virtuous, clever, or poets, kings, paupers, or emperors. Everyone, whether they call out to the merciful Allah or to Ram, or proclaim commandments. Ah, yes, that's the Ades bit. Everyone gets together in all their countless forms, or maybe wanders around together is a better one, wandering and searching all the four directions in the world. Kabir says, but in the end, they just don't get it if they haven't heard the Satguru's message. So I don't think he's criticizing people for being pakandi here. He's just saying that how can we remember our past lives? I mean, maybe everybody, even these divine features people mentioned here, he's saying that none of them can remember their past lives. Or do they not have past lives? Might be a question which people might have discussed. If humans have past lives, then why doesn't Ganesh have a past life? I've never heard of it. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's so many stories. There seem to be a million stories. But what there is clear from this is that it's a very nice image, isn't it? That nobody ever comes back to where they're born again. Nobody ever comes back to this land. And such a, what would you call it? It's kind of nishpaksh. It's kind of dharm nirupeksh, as the term used to be for secular in I believe in the Constitution of India. It says in the Hindi version, dharm nirpeksh desh hai. So he's criticizing everybody that he knew of. Let's have a look at another verse. This one's from the Chitavani or Upadesh collection. Jinke naam na hai hiya. Now, why have I included this one? Well, we'll discover. I'll remind myself as I go. Jinke naam na hai hiye. That's Hriday May, I believe. Kya hove gal mala dale. Kahan sumirni liye. Kya hove pustak ke banche. Kahan sukh dhun kiye. Kya hove khasi mein basi ke. Kya ganga jal piye. Oh, hove kahan bharat ke rake. Kahan tilak sir diye. Kahe Kabir suno bhai sadhu, jata hai jam liye. Acha. I remember why I've included this one, because it's a bunch of devotional practices as well, isn't it? Why wear a rosary round your neck if you haven't got the name in your heart? If you haven't got the name in your heart, why wear a rosary round your neck? What would be the virtue for you actually just doing that? Will it do anything? Why practice recollection? Why chant out loud from a book? Pustak Banchana. Why blow a conch shell? Why take up residence in Kashi? Why drink Ganga water? Ganges water, I wrote. Interesting. Acha. What do you gain from keeping vrat vows? What do you get from marking your forehead with the tilak? Kabir says, listen, brother Sards, that will all be lost when you die. And again, you can see for Kabir living in Kashi in Benares, you just imagine what he would have known it as, in fact. In Benares, he would have seen people chanting from books. He would have seen people with rosaries. People putting on a show of practicing Sumarni and blowing conch shells. And then, of course, there's this Kashivas, this belief that residents in Kashi will grant you liberation because Shiva whispers the mantra into your ear as you die and grants liberation, however much of a sinner you are, if that's the right word to use, or whoever you like, however deluded you are. Though, as we know, Kabir also rejects that from the hagiographic story about how he went to Magar to prove that you didn't need to die in Kashi to obtain liberation. Why drink Ganga water? Well, why indeed these days? It's not very good to drink, but once it was very good. Okay, so I'm going to get too lost in that. Let me go on to I think the last verse that I'm going to read today. Is that right? Oh no, I've got two. Oh dear. All right, let's have a go and see. I might give out the last one. Thank you so much. This one's an interesting one, isn't it? Bakri, this one's Sado Parle Nipuna Kasai. So this is the first one I'm going to present to you today, which is clearly a criticism of animal sacrifice. Bakri mari bheri ko dhai, din mein dard na aaye. Kari asnan tilak de bete, bidiso dhebi pujai. Atam mari palak mein binase, rudhir ki nadi bahai. Ati punita unche kul kahiye, saba mahi adikai. इनसे दीक्षा सब कोई मांगे, हंसी आवे मोही भाई. पाप कतन को कथा सुना है, कर्म करावे नीचा. बूरत दो परस्पर देखे, गाहे बाहे जम खींचा. गाय भदे सो तुर्क कहावे. ये क्या इनसे छोटे? Kahe Kabir, suno bahi sadhu, kali me bhaman kote. So this is the most critical of Brahmins that we have had in all of these verses in one way, which is that he criticized particularly the practice of animal sacrifice. I think we got the text of it here in my English translation. Sadhs, pandits are accomplished butchers. They kill nanny goats and run after sheep with never a pain in their heart. They bathe and sit with tilak marks on their foreheads. They worship the goddess according to ritual practice. So by the time I lived in Benares in the 1970s and 80s, you weren't allowed to carry animal sacrifice out by the river, but everybody brought their goats and tied them up at the Shitala temple during the day, and then took them home in the night and did what is said here. It takes an instant to kill a living being, then the rivers of blood start to flow. They are said to be from extremely high and sacred families. They have authority in assemblies. Everyone calls on them to initiate them. Oh, my brothers, how this makes me laugh. This is a very typical Kabir statement, isn't it? That he laughs rather than weeping when he sees these things. They tell tales said to free from sin, but their actions are base. I've seen both of them and their disciples dying together. I think both of them means literally them and their disciples, dragging by their arms those who supported them to their deaths. I don't know specifically what's being referred to there, but it's kind of suggesting that you won't be doing very well if you put your faith in such Brahmin. And this is the kind of people who are often criticized as being panda, isn't it? The pandas of Benares and elsewhere. Those priests who you meet when you go there, who try and get you to pay the most money possible for doing a ritual to preserve your ancestors, and then tell you that you're not willing to give them even more money, shows you how little you care about your ancestors. Even a Westerner like me gets asked to do it because I speak Hindi. And I often ask the pandas, well, how does this work? Does it really work? And how do you know which village I'm from? How come there's now a panda who can take money from somebody who hasn't got a village any longer in India? If a man kills a cow, he's called a Turk. Yeah. But are these pandits' deeds any less? After all, they kill mostly goats. Kabir says, listen, brother Sads, Brahmins are deceivers in this dark age. Although I must say, well, shouldn't ramble too much, but I do strongly remember going to Kathmandu Valley in about 1979 and then walking into Chango Narayan temple courtyard at Dussehra and not being able to quite understand why it was important to dismember the carcasses of buffaloes all over the temple courtyard. But it was, because then people made blood, which they then put onto the cars and everything in order to purify everything. Most extraordinary. Ah, that's the end. There we go. Well, that is a rather strong ending for this evening's presentation. Thank you so much. I do not, as you can hear, greatly appreciate animal sacrifice, whoever does it. Thank you so much for listening to that. That is my presentation on this. But I would like to just say one thing before I finish, which is that these kind of criticisms of ritual practices are also found in the Buddhist siddhas such as Kanha and Sarapa, in the Charyagiti and the Doha Kosha. And I suspect also in the Sutta Pitaka as well, we will also find criticism of animal sacrifice as a pointless activity. So it's been a criticism which has come from the Buddhist tradition throughout its time. And it's also a criticism which has come from Jain tradition, which also objects to us even picking flowers to offer to the deities, any form of life. So it is a Shramana tradition to not want to involve ourselves in hinsa in order to adore something. And it's something which I think is well worth keeping in mind as an important part of Sant tradition as well. Thank you very much.
Peter sir, the way you are relating the dohas is so fascinating that, at least I feel like listening to them forever. And the way you have brought all the dohas together in a logical manner reminds me of the message that has always been taught in terms of not dogmatic precepts, but in terms of the practices. And I think the underlying message is Attadipa Bhava, be your own light. And that's what the Buddha taught, and that's what Dr. Ambedkar taught us, as early as 1936, when he told in a big gathering that you keep the message of the Buddha in your mind. Attadipa Bhava, be your own light. And when I was trying to understand, this Brahma Vidvansa, I think the Marathi equivalent will be the destruction, or, it's more than a destruction. It's like, bombings.
Oh, yes.
It's not mere annihilation. It's completely rooted out. Vidvansa has that connotation. So when you brought a beautiful talk today in terms of the Brahma Vidvansa.
So it's the uprooting of illusion as much as it's the destruction of illusion. And it is true that there are so many times that I mentioned today that you could see these things in terms of the raga, moha, and dvesha. But sometimes I also think it would be wonderful to look through the dohas and think, well, the 5 precepts that we keep before we meditate, the idea of not speaking incorrectly. So are the followers of the Brahminical traditions who tell you that you will definitely get liberation if you do this, speaking in a helpful way? Is it also to do with not causing harm, which is we can see the last one? Are these things also to do with the idea of not telling things which are false? You will get liberation if you do this. Is it also to do with not taking that which is not freely given? Because it seems a lot of this is designed to ensure that people are handing over things for stuff which maybe they don't need to hand over. I haven't done the ones about intoxicants. Those are not part of this at the moment.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think the way the categories like, working on the first sort of the Brahma is ranking the human beings, in terms of the hierarchical level, in terms of the higher or low, or black or white, or, on the basis of nationalism. I think the way you have structured it in terms of the criticism of the caste, destroying all the barriers between the two human beings, whatever they are, the caste, gender, and I think that's a beautiful way of putting. And I think the second aspect of the talk that relates to Buddhism is about, taking the responsibility, not relying on anything other than your own strengths, other than your own, because the Sai is within, isn't it? The Sai is not without. The Sahib is here. If we have, as Kabir ji says, "Jiu tilma hi tel hai, jiu chakmak mein aag, tera Sai mein base, jaag sake to jaag." And I think this Sai or Sar has been a very important word in Buddhism. I read recently that Ashoka also talks about Sar, that every religious group should try to find out the essence, the Sar. And here, as you are talking about, is instead of moving out in the jungle, where we are very easy to be killed by the slayer, we should roam within, like the Satipathan.
Yeah, we should roam within is a very nice idea. Yes. The jungle that needs roaming in is that within ourselves, not outside ourselves. Yes, that is a good way of thinking of it, because there's a lot of that as well, isn't it? That we've been looking at this way, that the image of all the external world is also present within us. And that is the world that also Vivek Das was pointing out to me, is the world that we need to explore. So, everybody has interpretations. But it's clear that the practice here in Kabir is not going to be reliant upon external supports. And it seems to me that a bit like the doctrine of the teaching to the Kalama of the Buddha, that there is something in there that we need to be able to test this out for ourselves to see we can understand it for ourselves, because that will be the best test of it.
Yeah, and the third parallelism that I took it from your talk is about Satkai Ditti, or Sila Vrata Paramarsha, the first sort of a barrier that one needs to break if one has to free. And I think this belief that some kind of a ritual or some kind of the repetitive practices will help me to attain Nibbana, or to see as it is. So I think the way you have structured your talk today, I think I found it very interesting. It's like Brahmajala Sutra.
Yes. Yes, you lay out the different teachings of different groups and then point to the inconsistencies in them. So in that way, it is very analogous to Brahmajala Sutra, but obviously a very poor ability of mine to do something as excellent as the Buddha's one. But the idea is right. Yes, we should look very much at it like that. It would be so wonderful if there was a particular Kabir work which was like that, but it's not preserved like that because it's an oral tradition. So instead, we must, for each of ourselves, create our own Brahmajala Sutra.
That's very true. And, this is not about this talk, but about your love for Hindi. And it comes out through the way you, recite the dohas. And I think one of the students has done a poet, the noun poem of Om Prakash Valmiki. I think that's he's your student, I think. He published one. He says that there is a poem written by Valmiki who uses nouns.
Well, I don't know this, but I'd love to learn more about it.
But he's your student maybe. But what we will do now, we will open it up the class for another 5 or 10 minutes of discussion before we request Kamlesh ji, end up our today's session with the class. But before that, we will open up the room for anyone
please.
anything to add or comment on or ask questions.
And you can also put things into the chat if you don't want to be forced to speak to the group. But otherwise, you're welcome to unmute and ask your question. Or your comment.
I think today's talk was so clear and so lucid.
It's a bit difficult to follow on, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, no, here we go.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's Annapurna Pandey.
Please.
It is such a pleasure and such a delight to hear Professor Peter, right? And it is just amazing that the way in the 21st century we are trying to interpret Kabir and making sense of the dohas, the beautiful, the teachings, how we can internalize and find meaning in our life. So I think it is so needed. So thank you, if I can call you Peter. So thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter, for this wonderful discourse, and especially hearing the dohas from a non-Hindi speaker. And it just feels enchanting, I must say, that the way beautifully you are reciting. So my suggestion is that maybe, Peter, when you are doing this amazing job, to bring up, like, how, in what way Kabir lives on today, and how he can, or kind of, through the teachings which we are doing. But it would be wonderful just to kind of, connect to the present context, like, when the world is full of so much of atrocities going around us. And it's so sad to see the loss of life, how constantly human rights is constantly kind of, really, threatened and totally tarnished. So it's just kind of, maybe it is to think of for the both. I'm not putting the burden on you, Peter, like for the speaker, for you, and also the participants, how we can really live these teachings. That's something to think about. But again,
thank you so much, Annapurna. I think, in fact, in some cases it's because जहां तक मैं हिंदी बोल सकूं ये है क्योंकि मैंने लोगों के मुंह से हिंदी सुनी, और जो मेरे याद आश्त में हैं वो लोगों की बानी है, लोगों की बोली है। तो जैसे
और पूरा बनारसी है।
हाँ, वही तो वही है।
आप जैसे बोलते हैं
40 साल पहले की बनारसी की तरह है।
बनारसी है, क्योंकि मैं दिल्ली में पढ़ी हूँ, तो मेरी हिंदी जो है पूरा पंजाबी हिंदी। I'm from Odisha. But Banaras is one of my most favorite places in the world, and I have been to Kabir Sthali. I have been to the kind of, that in Banaras. I have sat there and listened to many villagers coming in and chanting Kabir Doha. And just to share my wonderful, which I really cherish, that one day, one evening, I told my friends in Banaras, I want to go to Kabir Sthali, and they took me, but the temple was closed. So I said, okay, I want to sit down for a few minutes. I sat there, and you would not believe, it was getting dark, but a group of villagers came from somewhere in Madhya Pradesh. They came and they sat down and they started chanting, and they did not even ask me where I was from, and I was enjoying their company. And then thoda der ho gaya, I think it was around 8 p.m. I said, I'm going. They said, अरे कहाँ जाओगे, बैठो, अब हम लोग खाना बनाएंगे, खाना, और कल सुबह हम लोग सभी चले जाएंगे, so तुम भी चले जाना. I can never ever forget that love and affection and that love. not without even questioning, without even asking me where I was from, whether I believe in Kabir or not. So this is the kind of, how Kabir lives on in the villages, in the hearts of the people who simply do not see any difference in terms of religion, race, caste, sexuality, so on and so on and so on.
Good. Very
yes.
good. Very good.
And I think one thing I would briefly say as well is that we had reserved the last talk of this six talk series precisely for talking about how does Kabir live on today. And it'll be more of a conversation next week between Mangesh and myself. We'll be talking about some of these questions about, it's a tragic world at the moment in many ways. I sometimes get to the point where I don't dare to open the newspaper, kind of, not on the computer, obviously nowadays, really, in a way, because it's such a sad kind of situation. So it is a question about how can you stay connected with your own heart at a time when things are so shockingly difficult, and it is a mystery, but one that we keep having to engage with. Thank you so much, Anuparna. And I can see Dara wrote a nice message to us as well, which is a kind of question as well. The Kabir's teachings, the importance of a direct connection. Yes, because just like in Buddhism, it's a talk about you yourself need to make the connection. We mustn't have intermediaries. We are the people who must make it. This bhakti also has this important teaching in it, doesn't it? That we don't need any intermediary. We can be the person who is the seeker, and that's what we need. How Buddhists can engage with the bhakti? Yes. It's also interesting, Dara, that although we often translate bhakti as devotion, because it relates to the verb as well, which means to share. So it's also to participate in the divine. But it's become so set to say that bhakti means devotion that we forget that it means sharing in the divine as well as devotion to the divine. And you've got that lovely Mate Tilaka Hata Malabana, Loganaram Likaona Jhana, Jo Ho Bora, To Ram Tora, Logamaram Kaha Jane Mora. Yes, indeed. How do people know the stories, really? Yeah, and people using religion for war is, we are all just humans, so it's not surprising that people do the most strange things. And somebody, Kripa Shankar, is going to have a conversation with you as well. But I think I'd better stop and look at that one now. Are there any more spoken questions, or is it time for the musical rasa? So Mangesh was saying about one tsar. So they do say in Buddhist tradition as well, there is one rasa to all of the Dharma. Yes. And one of the best ways to appreciate the rasa of Kabir is to listen. And we will have rasa svadne. Rasa swad ka jo mauka hai, to wo hai jisme hum rasa ka priya ban jate hain. Dhanyavad.
Thank you so much. Before I request our dear friend Kamlesh to sing some duas for us, just to have a word on bhakti and what is traditionally known as bhikshu, because the meaning of the word bhikshu is the sharer, was someone who partakes in the teachings of the Buddha. And I think the word bhakti, as now the scholars are saying, the way it was constructed as an all India phenomena in terms of nationalistic idea, relates to the bhakti. Indeed, these bhagats had a network. Namdev knew all this bhagat around and all. So I think what the point that Peter Sahib has made here is very beautiful. It's a sharer in the, if you want to call it, divinity or the enlightenment or Sukhavati or Begampura or Prempur and whatever. So I think a very beautiful explanation there. So Kamleshji, we are ready to listen to your rasa. Kindly bestow your sweet rasa to all of us.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter sir and Mangesh sir. I am trying to sing Chithavni aur Upadesh, Bakri Mari Bhedi Kudaye. बकरी मारी भेड़ी को धाए, दिन में दर्द न आए। हाँ, बकरी मारी भेड़ी को धाए, दिन में दर्द न आए। करी स्नान तिलक दे बैठे, विधि सो देवी पूजाए। आतम मारी पलक में बिन से, आतम मारी पलक में बिन से, रुधिर की नदी बहाई। अति पुनित ऊंचे कुल रहिए, सबा माही अधिकारी। इनसे दीक्षा सब कोई मांगे, इनसे दीक्षा सब कोई मांगे। हंसी आवे मोहि भाई, पाप कटन को कथा सुना है, कर्म करावे निचार। बुढ़त दो परस्पर देखे, हाँ बुढ़त दो परस्पर देखे, गहे बाहि जम खिंचा। One more. पाहन पूजे हरि मिले, पाहन पूजे हरि मिले, तो मैं पूजू पहाड़। तात यह चाकी भली, पीसी खाए संसार। मूर्ति धरी धंधा रचा, मूर्ति धरी धंधा रचा, पाहन का जगदीश। मोल लिया बोले नहीं, खोटा बिस्वा बीस। पाहन को क्या पूजिए, पाहन को क्या पूजिए, जो नहीं देह जवाब। अंधा नर आशा मुखी, यो ही होय खराब। अंधा नर आशा मुखी, यो ही होय खराब। थैंक यू, धन्यवाद।
Sadhu, 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 sadhu.
So before we end, for today, I would like to request Peter Sahib to kindly, have goodbye words for today. And before we meet next week, the same time, 4:30, to enjoy the beautiful essence of the truth that flows through the Vani of Sadhguru Kabir. So, Peter sir.
Thank you so much, all of you, for listening to me and sharing with Mangesh and myself. And Jayashree is coming. I'm pleased to see you there this evening as well. It's
hello sir, good Jai Bhim sir, Jai Bhim Mangesh ji, and
Jai Bhim. So I'm just finishing my words.
I'm sorry,
for today.
actually I was very busy.
It's all right.
I could not. Sir, it was wonderful lecture today, but I could not attend the whole lecture, but I'll listen it afterwards.
Thank you so much. And I do believe that there is a recording, so I can also listen back afterwards along with others and maybe identify the things that I said which were the most meaningful, and those which were like the oil cake and can be discarded and left aside once I've pressed the oil cakes to find the rasa within it. So I think that in fact is my last comment for this evening. There is one of these Kabir verses in which it mentions this idea that one of the things that we must do in our practice is to be like an oil presser. We should regard the experience that we're experiencing, the things, the minds, everything, the Namarupa, as being like an oil cake, like one of those, surprisingly it's called bani, but it doesn't mean bani. And so they used to have a cake of sesame seeds, and then you used to be able to press that. You probably still can, but in the factory nowadays. And out of it became the tilla, which is the sneha as well, the oil, the love, which is the essence of the practice. So let us not get caught up in the oil cake, which will be nice for feeding the cattle or something, but not really that wonderful. And let us try in our own practice to press the oil cake of experience to get the oil of love, which lies within it. Thank you. That's my last thought for this evening.
Thank you, Peter sir, and see you all in the next session, both next Saturday. Thank you so much all.
Thank you all of you too. Thank you indeed.
Thank you, sir.
Jai
Thank you,
Bhim.
sir.
Thank you
Jai
so
Bhim.
much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
much,
so much.
sir.